The accidental signal. That Selvari Confederation was a peaceful and advanced civilization. Their people had never known war, only diplomacy and science. They explored space with curiosity, never expecting danger. But today, they had made a mistake. Deep in the outer sector of their territory, a research ship named Vashtar drifted silently. It had been sent to investigate an old, forgotten satellite found floating in the void. The satellite was covered in dust and debris, its metallic surface scratched from centuries of drifting through asteroid fields. The Selvari scientists inside the Vashtar were eager to uncover its secrets. Dr. Kelvis, the lead scientist, examined the satellite from behind a protective glass screen. Its design was primitive compared to Selvari technology, yet something about it felt different. A strange energy signature pulsed from deep within its core. "This structure is not one of ours," Dr. Kelvis muttered, his tendrils twitching with curiosity. "Its materials suggest it is very old, perhaps from an extinct civilization." His assistant, Yalrin, scanned the device with a handheld scanner. "The data storage seems intact. We might be able to recover some historical records." Dr. Kelvis nodded. "Proceed. Let's see what we can learn." Yalrin pressed a button, sending a small electric pulse into the satellite. The device reacted immediately. The screen in front of them flickered, lines of unreadable text appearing. Then suddenly, a loud beep echoed through the room. "Sir, something just activated," Yalrin said, his voice filled with uncertainty. Dr. Kelvis stared at the screen, his 4 eyes narrowing. The satellite had begun transmitting a signal, a pulse, spreading through space, a message. This wasn't just a storage device, Dr. Kelvis realized, his voice barely above a whisper. This was a beacon. Back on that Selvari homeworld, the Science Council received an urgent report from the Vashtar. The transmission had been sent out into deep space, reaching distances far beyond the Selvari's known borders. High Chancellor Varix, the leader of the Selvari, listened in silence as his advisors explained the situation. "We do not know who or what that signal was meant for," one of the advisors said nervously. "But it has been activated. If anyone is listening, they will come." Varix's expression darkened. Who would design such a device? What was its purpose? The council remained silent, but deep inside, they all had the same thought. Had they just called something dangerous to their doorstep? Meanwhile, in the vast darkness of space, the signal traveled light years in mere moments, cutting through the void like a knife. It reached systems untouched for centuries. It woke something up. And then, someone answered. A single red light blinked to life inside a silent, ancient warship buried deep within an asteroid field. A human warship. It had been waiting. And now, it was coming. Aboard that Selvari research vessel Vashtar, alarms blared through the control room. The accidental signal had been sent nearly an hour ago. And now, something was responding. Dr. Kelvis stared at the screen, his tendrils twitching nervously. "Confirm that reading," he ordered. Yalrin, his assistant, swallowed hard as he analyzed the data. "It's real," he said. "We're detecting an incoming vessel. It's moving. Fast." Kelvis turned to the ship's pilot. "Can you identify it?" The pilot, a younger Selvari named Relvik, worked the controls, his fingers shaking. "The vessel does not match any known configurations. It's massive." A deep silence filled the room. Unknown ships were rare in this part of the galaxy. The Selvari had mapped and catalogued every species they had encountered. No one had technology superior to theirs. At least, that's what they had believed. "Distance?" Kelvis asked. "Less than 1 light hour," Relvik responded. "And closing in fast." Kelvis felt a sense of unease creeping into his chest. "We need to inform the Science Council immediately." On that Selvari homeworld, High Chancellor Varix stood in front of a massive display screen. A holographic image of the unidentified ship hovered in the air, rotating slowly. The Science Council watched in silence. "This ship is unlike anything we have ever seen," one of the military analysts said. "Its design is brutal, purpose-built for war." The ship was massive, almost 4 times the size of its Selvari cruiser. Its structure was dense, heavily armored, and covered in strange, blocky patterns. The hull was reinforced with a dark, unknown metal, and there were no visible markings to identify its origin. The analyst continued, "Whoever built this, they are not explorers. They are warriors." Varix narrowed his eyes, "And it came because of the signal." "Yes," the analyst confirmed. "It had been dormant for centuries. The moment our researchers activated that beacon, this ship powered up, and now it's coming straight toward us." The council members murmured among themselves. One of them, an elderly scientist, asked, "Have we attempted communication?" "We sent a standard diplomatic message," the analyst said. No response. Varix took a slow breath. "Prepare our fleet." The council gasped. "You think this is an attack?" Varix's expression was grim. "A warship does not answer distress beacons. A warship arrives when war is coming." Back on the Vashtar, panic was beginning to spread. The mysterious ship was now dangerously close. Its energy readings were off the charts. Kelvis knew they had little time. "Initiate a long-range scan," he ordered. Yalrin pressed several buttons on the control panel. A deep pulse of energy was sent toward the approaching ship. The results came back instantly, and what they saw sent chills through the crew. "No," Yalrin whispered. Kelvis read the data, his breath catching. "That's impossible." The ship's armor was nearly indestructible. Its energy reserves were massive. And worst of all, its weapons were already armed. Then, for the first time since it had awoken, the ship sent a response. A deep echoing signal vibrated through the Vashtar, shaking the walls and rattling the crew's bones. It was not a greeting. It was a warning. And the message was terrifyingly simple. "You have called us. Now face the consequences." The Vashtar's control room was filled with an eerie silence. The message had been clear. Whoever was on that ship had received their signal. And now they were coming. Kelvis's mind raced as he stared at the glowing screen. The unknown vessel had slowed its approach, but its energy readings were spiking. It was preparing for something. Yalrin's voice trembled. "Should we try to send another message?" Kelvis hesitated. Their first attempt at communication had been ignored. The response they had received was not the reply of a peaceful species. It was a declaration of dominance. "No," Kelvis said firmly. "If they wanted to talk, they would have answered before." A sudden chime echoed through the control room. Relvik, the pilot, gasped as new data scrolled across his screen. The warship, it just activated something massive. Kelvis turned sharply. "What kind of activation?" Yalrin's face went pale. "Weapons systems." A deep, dreadful silence fell upon the crew. Aboard that Selvari command ship Nereus, Admiral Vekrin stared at the tactical display. Their fleet, 12 heavily armed cruisers and 3 dreadnoughts, was already in formation, waiting for the unknown vessel to arrive. But something was wrong. This can't be real," one of his officers stammered. Vekrin clenched his jaw. "Report. The enemy warship. It's shrugging off our scans," the officer said. "It has advanced countermeasures that block most of our readings. We can barely analyze its structure, let alone its systems." Vekrin narrowed his eyes. That was impossible. Even the most advanced ships in the galaxy couldn't hide their energy signatures from Selvari scanners. But then came the worst part. "We managed to get a brief scan of its hull," the officer continued, his voice shaking. "Admiral, it's made of materials we don't even understand. The density is—" He stopped, as if afraid to speak the next words. Vekrin stepped forward. "Speak." The officer swallowed. "It's nearly indestructible. Nothing in our fleet can break through that armor." The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. If this warship had technology that superior, then every battle strategy they had was meaningless. Any communication? Vikran asked. None, another officer confirmed. It's not answering our hails. Vikran's fists tightened. This wasn't a mistake. This ship wasn't here for peaceful negotiations. It was here to show its power. Back on the Vashtar, the tension was unbearable. The unknown warship was now close enough to fully eclipse the view from the main observation window. It was massive. The vessel had no smooth surfaces, no elegance in its design. It was a floating fortress, built for destruction. Towering armor plates layered across its hull like the scales of a predator. Gigantic weapon batteries lined its exterior, each one crackling with an eerie red glow. Then, for the first time, the ship made a move. A single, deep thrum vibrated through space. The warship was charging its weapons. Kelvis's tendrils curled in fear. We need to get out of here. Relvik, the pilot, shook his head. We can't. The warship has locked onto us. If we try to leave, they'll destroy us. Kelvis felt his heart pound. He had spent his life studying the universe, but he had never encountered something like this before. Then the ship spoke again. But this time, it wasn't just a message. It was a demand. The ship's transmission cut through every frequency, overpowering their systems. You called. We have answered. Now prove you are worthy. Kelvis didn't understand. Worthy of what? Then he saw it. The warship had redirected its weapons, not at the Selvari fleet, but at a nearby moon. And then, with a single shot, it obliterated it. The Selvari crew could only watch in horror as the entire moon, an ancient celestial body that had existed for millions of years, was reduced to dust in seconds. The message was clear. The warship wasn't just powerful. It was unstoppable. Kelvis could barely process what he had just witnessed. A moon. Gone. Not shattered into pieces, not cracked or damaged. Completely erased from existence. One shot from the mysterious warship had done what an entire fleet of Selvari dreadnoughts could not. On the Vashtar's bridge, the crew was frozen in fear. Relvik's voice barely rose above a whisper. How? That kind of power. It shouldn't exist. Kelvis felt the same way. The most advanced weapons in the known galaxy could devastate planets, yes, but not like this. Those required bombardments over time. But this ship, it had erased a celestial body in an instant. Then the ship spoke again, its voice cutting through every communication system. You called. We have answered. Now prove you are worthy. Kelvis's breath hitched. What does that mean? Admiral Vikran, aboard the Selvari flagship Nereus, had heard the same transmission. His claws gripped the armrests of his command chair. He turned to his officers. What do we know about this ship? A technician scrambled through data. Nothing new, sir. The ship still refuses to identify itself. Its weapons, they defy everything we understand. And its shields. What about them? Vikran growled. The technician gulped. They aren't shields. At least, not like ours. It said, shifting energy field. Every scan we attempt, every probe we send, it adapts. It changes. Sir, this ship isn't just armored. It's evolving. Vikran's mind raced. Adapting defenses, weapons strong enough to erase a moon. And now, a challenge. This was a species that had no equal. The officer at the weapons console hesitated. Admiral, do we attack? Vikran bared his teeth. His entire career had been about power, about proving Selvari dominance in battle. But this was suicide. Before he could respond, the warship moved. On the Vashtar, Kelvis's eyes widened as the terrifying vessel split apart. The ship itself didn't break, it separated. Massive plates shifted and detached, revealing an inner core glowing with an ominous red energy. The ship was transforming. Yalrin gasped. It's preparing for something. Kelvis gritted his teeth. Yes, a demonstration. Without warning, The warship's core pulsed, and something emerged. A smaller craft, but still larger than anything that Salveri had ever built, descended from the main warship. It moved like a predator, slow and deliberate. Then, from the warship, another message echoed across the fleet. "Survive this, and you will earn our respect." Kelvis's blood ran cold. This wasn't a battle. This was a test. The smaller craft ignited its engines, and everything in the sector turned to chaos. Panic spread through the Salveri fleet. No one had ever witnessed technology like this. The massive warship had split apart, revealing a terrifying core that pulsed with unknown energy. And now, from within, a smaller craft had emerged. Though smaller was relative. It was still colossal, larger than a Salveri dreadnought, and it moved with terrifying precision. On the Vashtor's bridge, Kelvis gripped his console. "This isn't an attack," he murmured. "It's a test." Relvik turned to him, his mandibles clicking nervously. A test? What kind of species tests its enemies like this? Kelvis knew the answer, though he didn't want to say it aloud. A species that has no equals. The smaller warship accelerated. It wasn't heading toward the fleet. It was weaving between the Salveri ships at impossible speeds. Its movements weren't erratic. They were calculated, testing response times, studying formations. Then it struck. Without firing a single shot, it ripped through a Salveri destroyer. It didn't collide. It simply passed through, and the ship split apart as though sliced by an invisible blade. There was no explosion, no fire, just a clean, silent annihilation. The Salveri fleet opened fire. Every available weapon unleashed a storm of plasma, torpedoes, and kinetic rounds. The smaller human craft didn't dodge. It didn't need to. Every attack vanished the moment it reached the ship's strange energy field. Torpedoes disintegrated. Plasma beams scattered into harmless particles. It was as if the ship existed outside of reality itself. Admiral Vekran's voice rang out over the fleet-wide comms. "All ships, retreat. We are not equipped for this battle." But the warship's voice returned, cold and absolute. "There is no retreat. You fight. You survive. Or you fall." The smaller ship unleashed its first attack. A single invisible wave spread outward. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. There was no explosion, no fire. But half the Salveri fleet shut down instantly. Lights flickered, engines sputtered, and entire dreadnoughts drifted lifelessly in space. Kelvis watched in horror. "This isn't war," he whispered. "This is a demonstration of power." The warship's message echoed again. "Is this the best the galaxy has to offer?" And then, for the first time in Salveri history, a fleet surrendered. The silence that followed was heavier than any battlefield roar. The Salveri fleet, once a force feared across the sector, now hung lifeless in space, ships drifting like dead husks. The strange energy pulse from the human warship had disabled over half their fleet in an instant. No one knew how. No one knew why. On the Vashtor's bridge, Admiral Vekran stood frozen. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were filled with disbelief. This isn't possible," he whispered. Kelvis swallowed hard, watching the human warship on the main screen. It hadn't moved after the attack. It simply loomed in the darkness, watching, studying, judging. Then the ship spoke again. "Your fleet is broken. Your weapons are useless. You have two choices. Learn from this, or be erased." A wave of chilled fear passed through the Salveri command crew. Every species they had ever fought had one goal: domination. They had seen enemies fight for territory, for survival, for conquest. But this was something else. Kelvis exhaled, gripping his console. "They don't want to conquer us." Relvik turned, his mandibles clicking. "Then what do they want?" Before Kelvis could answer, the human warship moved. A dark blur against the void. It glided toward the disabled Salveri dreadnoughts. There was no warning, no buildup. One moment it was still, The next it was right in the middle of their fleet. A single beam of light extended from the warship, scanning one of the drifting dreadnoughts. The ship powered back on instantly. Systems rebooted, shields flickered back to life, engines reignited. Kelvis' eyes widened. They're returning our ships. Vecren clenched his fists. No, they're choosing. As if to confirm his words, the warship's voice echoed through the fleet. Some of you will live. The next moment, half of the disabled Selvari ships erupted into fire. Explosions rippled through space as dreadnoughts and destroyers were reduced to dust. Entire warships were erased in an instant, silenced without a chance to fight back. The Selvari fleet watched in horrified silence. Vecren slammed his fist on the console. They're executing us. Kelvis' voice was hollow. No, they're making a point. The human warship didn't just destroy random ships. It eliminated those with the most war crimes on record, those known for brutal planetary bombardments, for ruthless attacks on the defenseless. The Deathworlders weren't just testing them. They were deciding who was worthy to exist. Relvik's mandibles twitched. This is madness. They're playing judge and executioner. Kelvis exhaled. And what can we do about it? Vecren turned toward the comm officer. Send a surrender transmission. That Selvari had never surrendered before. Not once in their history. Their empire thrived on dominance, on fear, on absolute victory. But now, faced with something beyond their understanding, there was no other choice. The comm officer hesitated. Admiral, I don't think they'll accept it. Vecren gritted his teeth. We have to try. The surrender signal was sent, a full transmission, across all known frequencies, declaring that Selvari fleet's unconditional surrender. They expected a response. Maybe mercy. Maybe negotiation. Instead, the human warship finally turned away. It didn't acknowledge their surrender. It didn't respond. It simply drifted back into the darkness of space. Then, one final message echoed through their ships. Your fate is in your hands. Do not test us again. And just like that, the Deathworlders were gone. For the first time in Selvari history, they had been spared. The Selvari fleet remained frozen in space, their once mighty warships now mere shadows of their former power. The human warship had vanished into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but wreckage, silence, and fear. It had not taken their surrender. It had not claimed their territory. It had simply judged them, punished those it deemed unworthy, and left. Admiral Vecren stood on the bridge of the Vashtar, his claws gripping the edges of his console so tightly they threatened to snap. He could still hear the last words of the human warship echoing in his mind. Your fate is in your hands. Do not test us again. The weight of those words was heavier than any weapon blast. It was not a warning. It was a promise. Kelvis sat at his station, staring blankly at the destroyed remains of their fleet. His mandibles twitched, his mind racing through the implications. They had underestimated the humans. They had believed them to be lesser beings, unworthy of fear or respect. But now, after witnessing the sheer, effortless destruction they had caused, after realizing the humans had chosen who would live and who would die, it was clear that Selvari had never truly been in control. Relvik's voice broke the silence. What do we do now? It was a question no Selvari had ever asked before. Their empire had always been certain, always confident in its dominance. There was never doubt, never hesitation. Yet now, in the aftermath of their greatest humiliation, the answer was unclear. Vecren exhaled sharply. We leave. We recover. And we never make them our enemy again. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Admitting weakness was unheard of in Selvari culture. Their entire species had been built on the idea of strength through conquest. But after today, that philosophy seemed suicidal. Kelvis finally spoke, his voice quiet. The Council will not accept this. Vecren turned, his eyes narrowing. Then the Council will fall. It was a dangerous statement, but undeniably true. The ruling body of the Selvari Empire had pushed for war, had dismissed all warnings about humanity's potential. They had refused to acknowledge the possibility that humans could surpass them. Now, after this massacre, after witnessing a single human warship bring their entire fleet to its knees, it was clear that their arrogance had nearly led them to extinction. Kelvis looked at the remains of the fleet on the view screen. If the Council refuses to listen, then we must make them listen. Relvik clicked his mandibles. That sounds like treason. Vekran's expression hardened. Treason? No. Survival. A heavy silence filled the bridge. They all understood the truth. The Selvari were no longer the dominant force in this galaxy. Humanity had taken that place. The only question now was how the Selvari would react. They had two choices. They could cling to their pride, refuse to accept the reality of their defeat, and risk a second war, one that would undoubtedly result in their total annihilation. Or they could change, adapt, evolve. Kelvis finally straightened. We must return home. We must make them see the truth. Vekran nodded. We will. And if they refuse to listen, then we will make way for leaders who will. The Vashtar turned, engines igniting as it began its slow journey back to Selvari space. The remaining warships followed, silent and broken, but alive. As they left the battlefield, Kelvis couldn't help but glance at the void one last time. Somewhere out there, the human warship still lurked. Watching. Waiting. He shuddered. They had been spared today. But if the Selvari ever made the mistake of challenging humanity again, there would be no mercy next time.